Hi everyone, hope you all are doing good. In today's session, we're going to discuss about Dynamics 365 Finance Accounts Payable module. What is accounts payable? Accounts payable is a liability due to a creditor when you order goods or services without paying in cash upfront, which means that you're buying the goods or services on credit. The screenshot shown below illustrates the processes which can be managed in accounts payable module. For example, prepayment for the products or services that you're ordering with the supplier, payment of expenses, commissions or salary, refund to the customers. After you have received the products or services, how you manage to do the supplier invoicing, how you can manage to settle the prepayment or the normal payments against a particular invoice, management of purchase agreements, vendor charges, third party charges, method of payments, creating a purchase requisition or a purchase order, confirming the purchase order and submitting to the supplier. Let us now discuss about the different capabilities which are available in Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance Accounts Payable module. The organizations can effectively and efficiently manage liabilities with the help of Accounts Payable module. It also helps in distributing expenses, taxes, and charges across accounts. The Accounts Payable module helps in managing your vendors, purchase orders, discounts, transactions, invoices to reduce the liability and generate a greater income. So as per the agenda today, we're going to discuss about the vendor master, maintenance, vendor groups and posting profile, reviewing the vendor transactions, managing the vendor invoices for purchase orders, a non-PO invoice, which is nothing but a free text invoice, and how we are going to make use of the accounts payable dashboard in terms of invoicing or vendor invoice entry. When it comes to vendor payments, we're going to discuss about the vendor post-dated check prepayment functionality, the normal payments and settlements, payment terms, method of payments, payment schedules, payment transfers, and vendor payment dashboard. Similarly, there's also another feature which we can discuss about, that is a vendor charge code. It could be a third-party charge or a direct supplier charge. Further, we will discuss about the accounts payable reports, the main reports, that is products receipt report, vendor aging, account statement, top 100 vendors, vendor balance list, vendor invoice turnover. As per the agenda, let us now go to the vendor master and see how a vendor master is created and maintained. To see where the vendor master is maintained, you must go to accounts payable, vendors and all vendors. This is basically the list page containing all the vendors which are available in the current legal entity that I'm logged on to. All the tabs that you see over here are nothing but the fast tabs, and the tabs on the top are called the action pane. All these tabs that you see are very much self-explanatory. For example, you have the general information, you have the address, contact information, miscellaneous details, vendor profile, purchasing demographics, invoice and delivery, purchase order defaults, payments, and financial dimensions. Let us now go one by one and see what are the details that are available in each tab. Talking about the general tab, you can see that there's a vendor account code, there's a vendor account name, and the vendor group. Moving on to the address fast tab, you can see that there is an address which is maintained. In Dynamics 365 Finance, you can have multiple addresses created with different purpose for each of the address. Moving on to the contact information, you can maintain the phone number, the email address, the fax number, etc. One additional feature which is available here is that documents like purchase RFQ, purchase requisitions, purchase orders, account statements, etc. can be sent to the supplier directly by using the email address which is configured. Moving on to the miscellaneous details, you can see that we can set up a credit rating for the supplier, we can set up a credit limit, we can group the supplier based on the buyer group and then use them for reporting purpose. One of the additional features which is available is that we can put the supplier on hold only for a particular transaction, let's say invoice. It could be for a payment, a requisition, or for all transactions. For example, when a new supplier is created in the system, it could be possible that you want to ensure that all the details what have been entered in the vendor master is correct. So after having the supplier created in the system, you can easily go and put the supplier on hold. You can even mention when the supplier is supposed to get released and the reason code for having the supplier put on hold. If the same supplier is being used in multiple other legal entities, you have a provision to have the same supplier code with all the details transferred to the other legal entities. Additional details can be captured in terms of vendor profile, like whether this vendor is a bid only vendor, whether he is only one time supplier, locally owned, small business, minority owned, women owner, etc. Purchase demographics is one such tab where you can maintain what is the supplier's default currency. Having the supplier default currency set up here means that whenever this particular supplier is used in any sort of transaction, the currency would automatically flow into the transaction. Having this said, most of the features or fields that we set up in the vendor master or any other master in Dynamics 365 is so as to ease the process of a user using this ERP. Having these details defaulted on any master means that they would automatically flow into the transactions and that the users don't have to select it over and over again. If you would like to have further details related to the primary contact of the supplier, you can have the primary contact created as a master in the system and have the primary contact linked with the supplier master. You can also specify details like line of business which can be used for reporting purpose. The same applies for segment, sub-segment and chain. If you would want to track from your organization who is the main employee who is responsible for the supplier, the same detail can be selected and attached here. If the supplier is a big organization having a group of companies and there are many order to accounts, then what you can do is in the system you can have all those suppliers created as individual accounts and have them all linked to one individual invoice to accounts. This means that all the orders would be placed to the order to account and all details pertaining to invoices and payments would be linked with the invoice to account. There's also a provision wherein you can link a specific number sequence group with the supplier. Details like delivery terms, mode of delivery, and sales tax group can also be linked with the supplier master. If the supplier is being handled in a region where there is withholding tax, then you can enable this feature saying that withholding tax is supposed to be calculated for this particular supplier. From the name itself, it is pretty much clear that this tab holds all the fields which can be defaulted on the purchase order. For example, the site and warehouse where it's supposed to be received. You can also set up what is supposed to be the multi-line discount or discount based on the type of supplier. For instance, here there are three different price groups created for multi-line discount. One for high volume vendors, for medium volume vendors, and for low volume vendors. Based on the group of supplier, we can have different price groups set up in the system for having the price list agreed with the supplier. For example, you can have two different price groups, one called domestic and the other one for international. Every time you're defining a price list in the system, you can define it against a particular price group. And what system would do is, it would check for all the vendors who are having this particular price group assigned with the price list and would apply the prices. Having such a feature makes it more easier for the users so that they don't have to go and define the prices for each and every supplier one by one. Talking about the payment, you can default what is supposed to be the default terms of payment for the supplier, what is a method of payment, what is a payment schedule, etc. There's also a provision whereby you can default the financial dimensions for reporting purpose on the supplier master. Proceeding with the vendor groups, you can always have a group of suppliers grouped together into one so that you can define features like terms of payment, the time between the invoice due date and payment date, the default tax group, etc. The two important aspects of having a vendor group defined in the system and having them attached to the supplier is so that the payable account for each and every supplier doesn't need to be individually provided in the system. It can be provided against the group itself. Secondly, having the suppliers grouped means that any reports from Dynamics 365 Finance can be retrieved based on the vendor group. Let us now further discuss about the vendor invoicing. The vendor invoicing is further broken down to purchase order invoicing and to non-PO invoice, which basically means that there are no items and only a free text invoice processing. The whole point of having an ERP is so that there is less dependency created on other departments, and it is much more easier in terms of communication from one process to another. How is it possible in an ERP that the accounts payable person can know that there is an invoice which is due for processing? To ease such processes, Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance have now come up with default dashboards which are configurable based on the user role. In case of accounts payable, there are two dashboards which can be used for this purpose. One is the invoicing dashboard and the other one is vendor invoice entry. Let us now go through these dashboards and then see how to process the vendor invoice for a purchase order as well as for a free text invoice. As you can see, I am currently in the vendor invoice entry dashboard. On to the left, you can see a summary of unposted invoices. You can see how many invoices are pending, how many invoices have been put on hold, how many invoices have been assigned to me for approval and are yet pending, how many invoice journals are there, how many journals are there which have been assigned to me, and how many invoices are there which have been pooled together for processing the invoice. In the center, I can see all the documents with the respective details which are not yet invoiced. For example, open purchase orders. I can see a list of all the purchase order numbers where the respective purchase order name, the supplier name, the invoice account, and the current status of the purchase order. If I were to know all the purchase orders which have been received in the system but not yet posted, I can see them separately. These are a list of all the purchase orders but with the view of their GRN number or the product receipt number. I can see a list of all those product receipts which have been posted in the system, also with the details of the purchase order name, the supplier name, and the date. If there are any purchase orders which have already been processed but are pending for invoice processing, then I can see them separately. If I wish to find any purchase orders, then it is easy for me as I can filter them with the help of a purchase order number or the supplier name. If that is not enough and I would need further information, then onto the right I can have links created for posted invoices, which are basically open vendor invoices, invoice journal, invoice history and matching details. If it be for suppliers, I can see the suppliers which have been put on hold, all the suppliers, similarly details of all the purchase orders and all the prepayments. Other than these informations from where I can easily action, on the top, as you can see, there's a provision where I can create a new vendor invoice. I can create a new invoice journal that is nothing but a free text invoice. If the same supplier is being used in multiple legal entities, then having access in one legal entity, I can have the invoice journal placed in the other. I can have an invoice register created, also an invoice approval. Let us now see how I can basically process the purchase order invoicing for all those purchase orders which are there in this list which have been received and not yet invoiced. I can either select them multiply or I can select them individually and then invoice. In order to have much better control and to avoid discrepancies between details that are available in the purchase order at the time of ordering, details that are there in the purchase order, for example, price, discount, quantity, etc., at the time of doing the GRN, that is the product receipt, and at the time of invoice, there's a feature which is available in the system that is called matching. There's three-way matching that is enabled in the ERP, which basically means that whatever has been ordered has to be what is received and the same is invoiced. If there is a three-way matching in the system, then it is pretty sure that there would be no discrepancies in terms of the order value or the quantity. When it comes to invoice processing, here in the invoice identification under the number, you can enter what is the supplier's invoice number. You can either, if there are multiple GRNs which have been made for this particular invoice or purchase order, you can either club all of them into one single invoice or you have a provision to select them individually. When it comes to dates, you can specify what is the invoice date as per the supplier's invoice. You can specify the date when it needs to financially impact your financials, and the due date is something which is automatically calculated based on the terms of payment and the invoice date that is given. However, there is a provision for you to change the due date accordingly. Let us now see about the non-PO invoice, that is the free text invoice. You don't need to navigate anywhere else from this particular dashboard. Having placed in this particular dashboard, you can go directly to the free text invoice or non-PO invoice from here. As you can see, a non-PO invoice or a free text invoice is as good as a general journal entry. You can specify the date as on when the transaction is supposed to affect your financials. The system would generate an automatic voucher number. You can select the supplier for which you need to make this invoice. You can specify the invoice date as per the supplier and the invoice number. For your identification purpose, you can define the description of this particular non-PO or free text invoice journal. Depending on whether it is a debit note, you can have the amount placed in the debit, or if it is a normal invoice, you can have the amount placed in the credit, and you can specify what is supposed to be the offset account. After having these details entered, you can simply validate and post the journal. However, if there are any workflow approvals which are linked with the invoice journal, prior to posting the journal, you must submit it for workflow approval. After having the workflow submitted and approved by the respective authority, you can proceed with the supplier invoice posting. Let us now discuss about the vendor payments functionality which is available in Dynamics 365 Finance Vendor Accounts Payable module. For passing a payment journal, I can go to Accounts Payable, Payments and Vendor Payment Journal, or I can directly go to one of the dashboards which are predefined by Microsoft, which is called Vendor Payments. Similar to the invoicing screen, I can perform anything and everything related to the vendor payments from this dashboard itself. For example, onto the left, under Summary, I can create a new vendor payment run. I can create a vendor payment. I can see all the vendor payments which have not yet been posted. I can see all the vendor payments which have been created in the system and assigned to me for approval. I can see all the electronic payments which are sent and needs bank confirmation. I can see the invoices which are past due for which the payment needs to be made and settled with the invoices. I can see all the suppliers which have been put on hold, and I can see all the suppliers irrespective of whether they have been put on hold or not. Moving on, under the vendor transactions, I can see all the invoices which are past due. This basically means that the invoices as per the due date have been entered in the system but have not yet been settled against any payments. The other way around, I can see all those payments which have been created in the system but has not yet been posted or marked against a particular invoice. If I need to find any transactions, I can easily find them from here either by using the vendor code or the invoice number or the payment voucher number. Moving on, if I need to run any report in terms of vendor aging or vendor payment summary, I can easily have them run from here by using this link. Let us now see how a vendor payment is done. For having a vendor payment created, I can easily click on this particular tile and it would take me to the vendor payment journal form for creation of a new payment. As you can see on the screen, the vendor payment journal line has been created with the transaction date as on which it is supposed to hit the financials. You can see that there is an automatic voucher number which has been created by the system. The supplier account is selected. There is a description which is given for prepayment. The amount is basically given in the debit column, and then there is a bank which is selected for the payment entry. Now let us see how a normal payment is done and how a prepayment is done. For example, if I need to make a prepayment, I can easily go and select the posting profile which is supposed to be for prepayment. Having the prepayment posting profile selected, the system is going to account the entry in the advance to supplier's ledger account and then further have them transferred to the normal payables when I have it settled against a particular invoice. For having the system notified that this is a prepayment entry, all I need to do is enable this checkbox which says that it is a prepayment. Now you can see that the method of payment has been given as check. Now using the same payment journal feature, I can even have the check generated. All you need to do is generate the check by selecting the method of payment as check and on the top by clicking on generate payments. In the generate check option, as you can see, you can specify what is the check number, or you can even load the check numbers into the system, and the system would then automatically select the next check number as per the check leaf. As soon as the check is generated, here you can see the payment status has been updated to sent, and the check number which has been issued has automatically gotten here. If you need to void this check, then basically you need to go to the payment status and have this transaction rejected, in which case it is going to void this check number. Dynamics 365 Finance also gives you a provision wherein you can basically settle the transactions, that means the payments with the invoices at the same time of making the transaction. For example, by going to the settle transactions form, you can easily select those transactions, that means invoices against which you want this particular payment to be settled. For example, if this payment is against these two invoices, then all I need to do is mark these two invoices and then click on OK. As you can see, I have not entered the debit amount, and having marked those invoices against which I need to make the payment, the system has automatically brought me the debit amount as well as it has marked those transactions. Similar to the vendor invoice journal which I had explained earlier, if there is no workflow, then the accounts payable person can simply validate and post the payment journal. However, if there are any workflows that are configured, then prior to submitting the journal to the concerned authority, you must validate to check whether there are any errors in terms of the system perspective. Once validated, you can submit the payment journal for approval. And once it has been approved by the concerned authority, you can proceed with the payment posting. The system also supports the feature of post-dated checks. For example, if it is a post-dated check that I need to transact using this particular vendor payment journal, then all the user needs to do is select the method of payment as post-dated check. As you can see in the setup against this PDC, it has been configured that the transaction once posted is going to go to a bridging account, which is nothing but a post-dated check issued control account. On reaching the maturity date, the system is going to reverse the amount which has gotten posted into the PDC control account and then affect the bank. If a particular payment journal has been marked as post dated check, then under the post dated check tab, it is mandatory for you to mention what is the maturity date. After having the vendor post dated check processed, you can see that there is a separate window where you can see all the vendor post dated checks. Here you can see that there is a maturity date, then there is a journal batch number from where the payment journal was processed and the amount. Now to have the post-dated check settled in the sense affecting the bank, all the user needs to do is go to settle and click on settle clearing entries. You can see that there's a warning which the system is thrown saying that this operation can only be performed on checks which are posted and mature. As you can see, the maturity date of this particular transaction is on the 12th of June, whereas as per the current date, it is only the 9th. Technically speaking, on the 12th, I can go ahead and process this particular post dated check, in which case it is going to affect my bank with the same amount. Let us now discuss about the vendor charges functionality which is available in the system. Whenever there is a purchase order that is created, it could be possible that there are charges relating to customs, freight, documentation, etc. There could be services which are provided by the direct supplier, and there can even be services which are applied by the third party. In both these cases, Dynamics 365 Finance has a provision of accommodating these sort of transactions. If you see, for example, the first charge code is created with the name of vendor fee, and in the setup the debit is given as item and the credit is given to customer vendor, which basically means that whenever there is a charge that is applied of having an item debit, it's going to increase or add on to the item cost, making it as a landed cost of the item, and the credit is directly going to hit the supplier that is in the purchase order. Let us say that it is a third party charge whereby it is not the direct supplier who is providing the services, in which case the debit is going to remain as item and the credit is going to go to a purchase accrual account. On receiving the actual freight forwarding invoices from the supplier, the same account can further be reversed and the actual supplier, that is a third party, can be credited. If a charge needs to be applied on any purchase orders, then you can go directly to maintain charges, specify the charge code, and specify the category. The category can either be fixed based on the number of pieces, percentage. In terms of an intercompany supplier, you can mention it as intercompany percentage or proportional. Let us say that the charge code is pertaining to a direct supplier. In this case, you will not be able to select the currency. The currency would be the same as that of the currency of the direct purchase order supplier. Let us now select a third party supplier who is providing us with the services. Let's say miscellaneous charges. In this case, as you can see, as soon as I define the charge amount, I can edit the currency. This is only applicable in case the charge that I am affecting belongs to a third party supplier. Let us now further discuss about the major reports which are there in the accounts payable module. There are reports for product receipt, that is to see all the GRN that has been made. There are reports for looking at the vendor aging. There are reports for the vendor account statement. You can see the top 100 customers. You can generate a report for seeing the vendor balance list and as well as for checking the vendor invoice turnover. To see these reports, simply navigate to Accounts Payable module. Under Inquiries and Reports, as you can see, Purchase Product Receipt Report, Vendor Aging, Vendor Transactions Report, History by Transaction Report, Account Statement, Top 100 Vendors, Vendor Balance List, Vendor Invoice Turnover. If I were to be more specific on purchase order reports, I can see the ledger posting related to the purchase orders. I can see all the invoices that have been made against a particular supplier, whether they are approved or not, invoice specification, vendor invoice journal report, etc.